probably wondering where I've been, or if I've really been gone for that long, who the hell I am. Well, like I say on the front page, I'm the guy with a website who reviews the games you haven't played in years. However, I haven't been much in the mood for video reviews since YouTube, well, let's just say they haven't treated me amicably. After they slapped the mute button on one of my most popular videos, I gave up on the whole scene and left YouTube to the dozens of blanky video game blanks that currently rule the site with an iron fist. That's not to say that I've just been sitting in my parents' attic eating Cheetos for the past 2.5 years. I mean, sure, there's been that too, but while I was away, I took it upon myself to right what once went wrong in retro gaming history. Remember GORF? This shooter by the recently deceased arcade giant Midway was released for every console you could possibly imagine.
And each one stunk!
Some other video game historians will tell you otherwise, but there's no better way to prove them wrong than with a direct comparison. Do any of these look like the arcade game? Even remotely? Okay, the VIC-20 probably comes the closest, but it's still missing a lot of the features that made the original game great. The little guy tried his best, but he can only do so much with a sound processor fished out of a Cracker Jack box, and with Midway and Namco fighting to the death over the rights to Galaxian. Actually, GORF borrowed a lot of content from other video games, which probably explains why it never found its way on any classic arcade collections. It's not on Arcade's Greatest Hits, it's not on Midway Arcade Treasures, and it wasn't even available on the download service Midway launched shortly before the company went down the toilet in 2009. Whatever the reason, Midway didn't want to give gamers GORF, and they didn't want anyone else giving it to them either. When Force Design finished its homebrew conversion of GORF for the ill-fated Atari Jaguar CD, the house that Jarvis built and Sumner Redstone demolished put its foot down, demanding that distribution of the game immediately be halted. GORF Plus is still out there in the wild, but in such limited quantities that it's destined to become the next air raid. Except, you know, its owner will actually want to play it. Fast forward to the summer of 2009. Midway was dead, I was bored, and my parents were out of Cheetos. I decided to start work on my own port of GORF because, hey, who's gonna stop me now? Sorry. Actually, a remake of GORF had been in the back of my mind for quite a while. I thought about making a conversion for the Neo Geo Pocket, then the Game Boy Advance once that system had been released. All I needed was the right tool for the job, a compiler that's powerful, flexible, and most importantly, had support for the basic programming language. Yeah, I know, I might as well have been asking for a unicorn. It was a pretty tall order, but someone delivered. That someone was Jeff Masung, who created Dragon Basic in 2004 and released it in the public domain a few years later. He was snapped up by Warren Spector's Junction Point Studios, and it's not hard to figure out why. The man is a miracle worker, turning the wimpy language you remembered from grade school into a powerhouse development environment. It's got support for practically every bell and whistle under the hood of the Game Boy Advance, and as it turns out, there are quite a few of them. 2 digitized sound channels? 4 independently scrolling backgrounds? Not 1, not 2, but 128 on-screen sprites? 256 freaking colors! Handheld or not, this system is a retro gamer's wet dream, and it was more than powerful enough to handle my project. So over the rest of the summer, I worked on my conversion of GORF. I started with the introduction, not knowing how much further I would get from there, and then just started adding stuff as I went along. I'd finish one stage, then advance to the next, plugging away at the design until the game was in a semi-playable state. Then I went back through and popped in all the stuff that I had missed, like a lives counter, collision detection for the ship, and the option to pause a game in progress. By the end of August, I had something resembling a game, but there was still more work to do. Urged on by my corner man, Brian Freak Servo Balson, I went for the gold, adding voice effects straight from the arcade game, a nifty title screen, and some modern amenities. Here's the mission matrix, basically a game of bingo with achievements as the chips. Finish a mission and you unlock some artwork in the game's gallery. Clear out a row or column and you earn features like a sound test or an expanded vocabulary for the Gorfian Empire. The hardest parts of designing this game were the enemy AI and the funky way the Game Boy Advance draws graphics. It was tough getting the characters to do exactly what I wanted, particularly the Galaxians, which would bunch up on the sides of the screen, and the enemies in the laser attack stage, which would get stuck in the corners and wouldn't come out. I even had to get advice from the fine folks at Atari Age to make the characters in the Space Warp stage spin around the playfield. Turns out that advanced math functions like sine and cosine are really important for that kind of thing. As for the graphics, the Game Boy Advance uses tiles, like a lot of game consoles from the 80s and early 90s. It stores both the tiles and their on-screen locations in about 64K of RAM, but all that data shares the same space and memory, so you have to be really careful to keep them separate. Otherwise, the screen looks like what you'd see in an NES game if you didn't blow inside the cartridge first. There were some bumps along the way, but all in all, I'm really happy with the way GORF turned out. It's on par with many of the other retro conversions on the Game Boy Advance. I'd go out on a limb and say that it was miles ahead of Arcade's greatest hits or those twin packs by Destination Software. Not bad for freeware, eh? You can download it from this link and either play it on the actual system or the latest version of the Visual Boy Advance emulator. Heck, you could even play it on a GameCube with the Game Boy Player if you want. I'm not picky.